Hi everyone, and a warm welcome to Peter Laws, who we've got for tonight's author chat. Peter, do you want to tell us a little bit about your books?
Hello, lovely to be here. Yeah, my books are kind of from both genres. So if you go to the bookshop, you'll find them on the fiction shelf, but you'll also find them on the non-fiction shelf as well. I quite like straddling those two genres, as it were. I mainly am known for fiction, and I write a series of books called the Matt Hunter crime fiction series. There's 4 of those so far, and they follow a character called Matt Hunter, who's an ex-church minister turned atheist professor, and he helps the police solve religiously motivated crime. They have kind of hints of the supernatural, but they definitely belong on the on the crime fiction shelf. Here's an example of a few of those. So I write those, and also my nonfiction book is called The Frighteners. Why we look, it's shiny. Do you like that? It's got a bit of foil on it. I was impressed when they sent me that. It's called The Frighteners: Why We Love Monsters, Ghosts, Death, and Gore. And I've always been fascinated by the morbid and macabre growing up, and for a while I wondered if there was something bad about that, if it was unhealthy. But I spent quite a lot of time researching the topic and realizing that my instincts were correct, which were that this sort of topic is completely not only natural, but actually can be quite healthy for a society to explore the dark side. So yeah, so I write those 2 things. I also write a magazine column for a magazine called The Fortean Times, which explores strange phenomena and the unexplained. And I also run a podcast, a new podcast, and I'll tell you about that in a little while. And I'm also a church minister kind of by trade. So I used to do a lot of that, but mainly these days I'm kind of writing and podcasting and that sort of thing.
So this is the first question I wanted to ask you, actually.
Yeah, cool.
As a church minister by trade, how much of you is in Matt Hunter?
That's an excellent question and a reasonable one, because I would say there's quite a lot of me in Matt Hunter. I mean, he's a lot cooler than I am and a lot kind of more intelligent than I am, but we do have similar senses of humor. I like infantile humor. I quite like toilet humor, and so he does often giggle at those sorts of things. But also, I think we've both got a mind that likes to ask questions. And even though I'm a person of faith, I still ask big questions, and I'm quite willing to explore all sides of an argument. So just because I'm a church minister doesn't mean that I can never say there may not be a God. There may not be. You know what I mean? It might not exist. There might not be such a thing, and it might all be just a pipe dream. To me, I'm quite open-minded about those sorts of things. But on the whole, I do move towards the kind of faith idea. Whereas Matt Hunter, he went through some pretty horrible things in Purged, which is the first book, and eventually he decided that faith was not an option for him, so he left it. The difference, I suppose, with him is that Matt Hunter grew up in the church and then left, whereas I grew up completely not in the church and actually very antagonistic towards Christians, and then randomly, well, not randomly, but surprisingly, became a Christian in my early 20s.
So the other thing that comes up quite a lot in the Matt Hunter books is there's a lot of references to Latin and things. Can you speak Latin?
No, I wish I could, but not really. I could probably sort of, pretend, but I would just embarrass myself and you. When I was at training to be a minister, I did learn a bit of ancient Greek, because that can be quite handy when you're looking at New Testament passages. You can pick the Bible up and you can assume, for example, that, like I'm doing a sermon for someone this weekend, and there's a bit in the Bible where Jesus talks to a little kid, and in the English translation it says he. So you assume it's a boy, but actually if you look at the original Greek, you realize it's a gender neutral pronoun, and so you realize this could be a boy or a girl. So I find that quite helpful. So I know a little bit of ancient Greek, not much, not enough to order a kebab, but enough to sort of get by. But Latin does sound cool because Latin sounds like scary. I think I'm programmed by horror films and The Exorcist and all that sort of stuff. And so Latin's got that scary vibe. So I should probably learn some of it. It's too hard though.
So how much research, talking about things like The Exorcist, because your new book's about demonic possession, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Good old demonic possession. This is the latest book, Possessed, which is the fourth book in the Matt Hunter series. And in the back of this, I share how at the back of my books, I always have a little kind of bit of autobiography, kind of the story behind why I wrote this particular book, and thanks and acknowledgements, but a story behind it. And the story behind this one was because in the last few years, there's been an increase in people asking the church for the ritual of exorcism. And in fact, you would think that sort of thing would kind of drift away in our modern rational climate, but on the contrary, actually, it's quite a big demand these days for people to ask for an exorcism, because for whatever reason they believe that they are possessed by the devil. Now, like I say, I'm very open-minded, so I'm open to the idea of demonic possession being something supernatural, but I'm very cautious about it because I'm also open to the chance that it is simply mental illness that has been misdiagnosed, and that's very dangerous. And so that tension between is demonic possession a real spiritual thing, or is it something to do with somebody's mental health, I found fascinating. And so I decided to write a crime fiction book about it, where it starts basically with that there's been a heinous murder, and the person who has committed this murder, people claim that it wasn't their fault because the devil made them do it. Whereas Matt Hunter comes along and says, what a load of rubbish. This guy needs help. He doesn't need an exorcism. He needs a doctor. And that book is that it starts fairly subtle, and then it goes crazy in the end. It's a pretty intense book, but I really enjoyed writing it. And in some sense, it's kind of my novel on current affairs, in the sense that people are interested in exorcism today.
It's surprising how much people still refer to it.
Yeah.
How much research did you do about the topic?
Quite a bit. I mean, I love research. I love that side of it. I really like it. So I did a fair amount of it. I didn't go so far as to kind of request to be present during an exorcism, but I have had experiences myself where people, particularly when I was in post as a church minister. These days, like I say, I spend most of my time writing, so I'm not responsible for a church at the moment. I kind of move around and speak in different places. Well, not at the moment, but normally. But when I was a pastor down in St. Albans, there was a few experiences where people in the community had said strange things were happening in their house, and then indeed somebody claiming they were kind of possessed. But for me, I'm so cautious about that, and I've researched so many of the cases where it goes wrong, exorcism goes wrong, that my first port of call is always to make sure that there's a GP involved, and I'm not an exorcist. There are people who are trained in those sorts of things, but I do think it's a bit of a risky thing. I say I'm not an exorcist, right? I'm not, but there was a time when the Daily Star, I think it was it was one of the kind of tabloidy newspapers did a full page spread, and it was an interview with me about exorcism. But the original headline was I think the UK's leading exorcist, Peter Laws, and I'm like, what? I'm not even an exorcist. So thankfully they changed that before it actually went to press. But yeah, so I love researching, and I get a kick out of that a lot. The nonfiction book I wrote, The Frighteners, was stacks of research, but that was cool because that was research that was very hands-on and very fun, because I was trying to have the book, even though it's you might think it sounds like a kind of psychology textbook because it's about why do we like to be scared, but it's written in a kind of Louis Theroux style, me going on crazy adventures and then explaining why these things are okay. So for that book, I went on a werewolf hunt, searching for a werewolf loose in Hull. I was chased by zombies through a nuclear bunker in Essex. I went to Transylvania and stayed in a hotel made of ice and looked for Dracula. Stayed in a haunted hotel. So that research stuff was a blast. That was one of the privileges of my life to write that book.
Yeah, apparently the werewolves location went down the back of my husband's school.
No, really?
Yeah, apparently.
Wow. Hey, you wanna check where he's at when the moon is full?
Well, he's quite tall and hairy, so he could be a werewolf.
Oh, I think you found Old Stinker.
I found one.
That's his name, by the way. The whole one, apparently, Old Stinker. Maybe
nice.
Maybe that feels relevant about your husband. I don't know.
But I'm reading The Frighteners at the moment, and I've just gone past the bit where you were on a BBC show.
Oh yeah, that was nuts. Yeah, I took part in this this BBC show where they blind drove me and a few other people into the middle of nowhere, into this beautiful mansion. And when we arrive, we're driving in the car up to the place, and the producer, we were blindfolded, right, to get there. And then they took the blindfolds off. And as we got to this old mansion, the producer stopped the car, then got out of the car, and we're like, what's going on? And then he freaked out, started attacking the car, and then just walked off into the middle of a field. And we're like, what the heck's happening here? And we got out and we walked up to this mansion where we were greeted by a one-eyed butler and a witch who basically took us in for the night. And we had lots of scary experiences happen to us, from being strapped to an electric chair and given shocks, to having insects thrown at us, to having to walk on fire. It was an absolute blast of a night. But it was a TV show that was trying to explore the same things I was doing in my book, which was, why do people like to be scared?
Yeah, I was really interested in that you said you were answering questions to not get shocked, and then you were doing too well, so you tried to throw it.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, yes, what was happening is, yeah, you're right. People were, I happened to be getting the questions right in the quiz, and which was the electric chair quiz. And when I got them right, it meant I didn't get a shock. And actually, I started to realize this is an opportunity I'm going to miss here. I would like the experience of being shocked with electricity, because I've never had it before. And so I did, and started deliberately getting questions wrong just so I would get shocked. And I don't even like getting electric shocks, but I just didn't want to miss the chance of what it would feel like. Felt not very nice, but at least I know.
So we've got some questions coming in on the stream. Samantha,
cool.
one of our admins, says she's currently reading Severed and really enjoying it. Where did the idea for the story come from?
Yeah, good question, Samantha. Well, the story comes from a kind of theological idea in Christianity, which is the notion that God is not just one, but is three, like Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that's a kind of fascinating idea, and quite a complicated idea to get your head around. But within Christianity, the idea is that God is this kind of community of three persons that absolutely love one another. You know, like the Father loves the Son loves the Holy Spirit. And, you know, if we become Christians, we're invited into that kind of community of love. So it's very positive. It's a good thing. But I just thought, what would happen if, like, they hated each other? And what happens if the Father, God the Father, despised Jesus the Son? And actually, what happens if God the Father was the one who murdered Jesus on a cross because he was jealous of his fame? And so that kind of twisted theology idea was the thing that prompted me to write Severed, because Severed Matt Hunter basically interacts with this pseudo-Christian cult who believe in the sort of thing I've just said. And all sorts of crazy stuff happens in that. But yeah, I enjoyed writing that book because it was exploring some interesting topics I found. And I like crime fiction that is not just about the death, I like there to be some sort of element of kind of hope involved, because otherwise I get a bit sad. I know that might sound a bit lame, but I don't actually, say a crime fiction book that's purely just about like a woman is like attacked in the park and is murdered, and then the rest of the book they work out who killed them, and then they find out who killed the woman, and that's the end. I mean, good for you. I'm very glad people like that. But sometimes I end up after a book like that feeling a bit, oh, that woman's still dead. It's that was a horrible situation. Whereas if you put a little tiny hints of the supernatural, ghosts and whatnot, I just find that gives me just this little sense of hope that maybe the woman who was murdered at the start, that's not the end of her. It's just a kind of comforting thing I do. That's why I like horror and monsters and the supernatural and the paranormal, because I think inherently those are hopeful topics, because they basically say, even if you suffer and die horribly at the hands of a serial killer, it doesn't have to be the end of your story. So I like that.
That goes on to another one of Sam's questions, actually. She says, how do you feel about being called the Sinister Minister?
The Sinister Minister. Yeah, that does sound like a wrestler or something. It makes me chuckle. But I suppose there's part of me that goes, well, to be honest, a lot of people who have not got any friends who are church ministers probably think most ministers are sinister, because, the clergy doesn't really have a great reputation. Either they're completely boring. Well, the stereotype is they're completely boring or strange or disconnected from the world. Or the other is that they're horribly corrupt. They're involved in abuse or exploitation. And so, yeah, it's actually, it's ironic that people would sometimes see the church as being a source of scariness, because I think it is. Because I grew up antagonistic towards the church. And when I met Christians, when I was like a teenager, when I had like Christians turning up at school and trying to kind of convert me, I was just like, you don't care about me. You just want like an extra number. And this is what I thought. I'm not saying they thought that, but this is what I felt. And I also just found them a bit scary. This idea of them believing in God. So I can understand why people would find it's sinister, but actually we're pretty normal people on the whole.
You actually made some really interesting points in your book, The Frighteners, about that, like the kind of how you could call sort of parts of classic literature and the Bible horror.
Absolutely, yeah, and this is one of my arguments when I sometimes, because I really like horror and crime fiction and true crime and all that sort of stuff and the paranormal. Occasionally, I've been interviewed on Christian, radio stations or newspapers or magazines or whatever, and sometimes they've interviewed me because I'm a Christian, but they're not into any of the stuff we're into, and some of them struggle with it. In fact, I actually had I had a situation once where I went to an interview, a little bit like this, but it was on a radio station, and when I left, I knew somebody who knew the producer, and they said, oh, that Christian radio presenter who interviewed you, she sent an email out before you arrived saying that there's a man coming to the studio today, and we think he might have a demon. He might have something demonic about him, because how can you be a Christian and like horror films or read stuff about people being murdered? There's clearly something off about this person. And so she was getting a bunch of people to pray for her to be protected. I mean, in the interview, it turns out she thought Harry Potter was evil as well. So that gives you an idea of, where she was. But yeah, but when people say that, and when Christians come to me and say, oh, you should be all sweetness and light and not explore the darkness, then I go to your point that you just made, which is the Bible itself is filled with horror. I mean, it's filled with hope, but it also explores horror. It doesn't hold back from crime and decapitations and, tent pegs in the head. It's pretty grim, but it can be a transcendent subject, because in the face of our mortality, we can have a sense of hopefulness. So So yeah, I have no problem with liking the scary and the sacred at the same time.
Cool. We're in good company. I had epilepsy awareness training a while ago that informed me I wasn't demonically possessed. So
did someone actually? Did someone say they thought that was the case?
Yeah.
See, there you go.
Epilepsy are demonically possessed, and I was like, "That's really nice to know. Thanks."
That is shocking. That's shocking.
Demonically possessed, actually. They said that. I was like, "Why are we even talking about this?"
Oh my word, that's shocking. And that's precisely what I was talking about before. The idea that people could, misdiagnose something like Tourette syndrome, for example, and they say, "Oh, well, they must be possessed by the devil." Or, I mean, I know some Christians who come out as gay. It just happens to be who they are. No problem with that whatsoever. Celebrate that. But some of the more traditional Christians, have said, well, you have the demon of homosexuality in you, and we need to pray the gay away is the phrase. And so, yeah, the story of possession, the subject of possession, is fascinating but heartbreaking, because there are tragic cases, like what you're saying, what happened to you, but people go even further, and there's teenagers who die during exorcisms because the people don't take them to the doctors like they should go. So yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? So someone here comes up as Facebook user. Sorry, if you type a question, can you put your name so I know who you are? It says, "Did you enjoy Transylvania? They went in the 70s and was disappointed with how nice Dracula's castle was."
Yeah, I absolutely loved Transylvania. It was my kind of ambition to go there, and I went for my 40th birthday, and I just adored it. I adored it because it felt like I was in the set of a film from which I learned so much as a kid, watching Hammer horror films and just kind of going, "Oh, this is that's my type of thing." Other kids are going, other lads have gone playing football or whatever, and I was like, no, I want to watch like Hammer horror or something like that. And I loved that kind of gothic, spooky atmosphere. And then I turned up at Transylvania, and it felt like I was in that zone. While I was out there, as well as the stuff I wrote for a book, I was also writing a separate magazine article on like Romanian folklore. And part of that trip, I was able to interview the daughter of a village wise woman, in this kind of little pub in an old Saxon village. And it was just wild. It was such a great time. By the way, I'd encourage people, if you're looking for a cheap holiday, go to Transylvania, because it's very good value. I think it cost us like £60 or something from Luton to fly there, and it's £1 a pint. And we stayed in a hotel made of ice up in the Carpathian Mountains. It was just great. So yeah, I loved it.
Sounds great. It was Jane Wynn, apparently, who's been there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's more and more people are starting to go. I know what you mean about the Dracula's castle, because the folklore about that, people go over thinking they're going to see Dracula's castle, but it's all a little bit touristy, really. I don't mind that, but you're not going to turn up and see where Bram Stoker was walking, because Bram Stoker never even went out there, as far as I know. I think he just got it all this information from the library in Whitby. So yeah, it's a great place.
Someone asks what your thoughts are on extreme horror.
Extreme horror. That's interesting. Funnily enough, when I was doing this BBC thing, there was a woman there called Zoe, and she's obsessed with extreme horror. So she loves to watch films that, like, even for me, are a bit much. But she actually took part in a live horror event called, and I was supposed to do this, and my wife wasn't keen on me doing it, so I dropped out. But this extreme horror event was called Cracked. And there you were blind driven into the middle of the forest. And for 6 hours, you had to go through a kind of almost like a survival torture experience. So and I'm like, I'm not into S&M and all that sort of thing. So I was like, it was supposed to be research for the book. And then I thought, actually, I'm not really into that. So I didn't go. But Zoe did. And I met Zoe at the BBC thing, and she said, for example, they were kind of making her eat disgusting food that would make her throw up. They were waterboarding her at one point. It's pretty intense. And then another point, they got a car and they put the car up on a jack and rev the engine. So the tire was going really quick, and they put her cheek right up to the tire, and as if it was going to rip her cheek off. And she said it was the most terrifying experience of her life, but she would do it again in a heartbeat because she just got such a thrill from it. So for me, extreme horror in that sort of way, which you could potentially die, I wasn't so keen on it for myself. But watching a film or reading a book which is extreme, I'm okay with that. I don't mind, because I know ultimately the people are actors and they're gonna walk up and walk away. So and I quite enjoy gore. You know, I love horror films and supernatural films where it's just all spookiness and, you know, there's no blood. But I'll quite happily watch a film where a head explodes. You know, I'm quite open-minded with that sort of thing. Some films, the violence gets a bit much, and I don't like sexualized violence. So if I'm watching a film where I feel that they're combining kind of sexual arousal with like attacking someone, I don't think that's necessarily a good idea for the audience. But just general extreme horror, I'm kind of okay with it. I wouldn't make other people watch it, but I'd watch it.
What are your favorite horror recommendations?
Oh, I lost you there. You kind of froze. I just thought you were staring me out. So can you say your question again?
What are your favorite horror movie recommendations?
Well, speaking of, you know, a spookiness which isn't necessarily about blood and gore, I absolutely love a film called The Changeling from 1980 with George C. Scott, which is a haunted house film, which I think is a beautiful and frightening horror film. I love Dawn of the Dead, the original zombie film with George Romero, directed that. I met him once and he was absolutely lovely. Recently, I quite enjoyed films like if people out there have got Amazon Prime, or I think Netflix has got it as well, is a film like Hereditary, which is pretty extreme in terms of tension, but I really like that. And The Babadook is also a great modern horror film. It Follows. Yeah, there's quite a lot of cool things. But The Changeling is a meaningful film to me. I love that film.
Someone here has asked, what was the first horror film you watched and the first horror novel that you read?
That's an excellent question. The first horror movie I saw, it's hard to tell, but I do know that I saw horror films that perhaps I shouldn't have seen when I was young, because I grew up, I'm fairly old, right? So I grew up around the kind of video nasties VHS era. And so at the beginning of the 1980s, video was this new technology. And I was born in 1974, so I was like maybe 7 or something when we got a video player, a VHS player. And video wasn't certificated in any way. So you could get all sorts of crazy stuff on there. And so around that time, the local video shop let me get anything I liked. And I would come in, and even when they started getting banned as video nasties, the guy in the video shop, even though I'm like sort of 8 at this point, I'd turn up and all the other kids are getting ET and stuff, which I love as well. But he'd say, oh, by the way, we've got a copy of Zombie Flesh Eaters. Do you want to see that? And I'd be like, yeah. So I would watch some of those. Sorry, that's a long way of saying it's hard for me to work out what the first film was. But I do remember seeing The Evil Dead very early. And that was banned that was banned for a while. And it was scary. And I remember going to school, and all the kids at school said, I've seen The Evil Dead, and it's nothing. It's lame. It's not scary at all. And I pretended that I didn't think it was scary, but I thought it was terrifying. And later I started to realize they didn't see it. They didn't watch it, but I did. And it was really scary. but it was an absolutely exhilarating experience. And it kind of opened my mind to what these sorts of films can do. It kind of widens your horizons. Here I am, sat in my little town, Chester Street in County Durham, where I'm from, and suddenly this topic of the spooky and the strange and the macabre made even my town seem potentially fascinating. Like the little house on the edge of the street was no longer just an old house. It was like, whoa, what happens if there's a ghost in there? What happens if there's been a murder in there? It turned the colors up of my general life and made things fascinating. So I loved all of that stuff growing up. I don't think it twisted me, because I also value kindness and doing good as well.
It's that was Jason Kelly, one of our admins, who asked you about those.
Oh, Jason Kelly, cool.
How did you get into writing for the Fortean Times?
I think I originally just wrote an article for them, and after I wrote an article for them, I'd read it for a long time. The Fortean Times, by the way, is this kind of it's an English magazine, but it's kind of known internationally, and it explores the strange and the weird, from poltergeists to UFOs to Bigfoot to miracles. And it's a great magazine, and it's quite hard to kind of write for. It's hard to get in to write for. So I couldn't believe it when my article was published. And then after that, the editor said, well, we liked what you did there. Would you like to start reviewing films for us? And 10 years later or so, I've had a column in there which I review horror films, and have been reviewing them since then. And I love that magazine. It's a really fascinating magazine. You don't have to believe this stuff. I've got loads of friends who are skeptics and rationalists who totally don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but they're fascinated by the topic nonetheless. And so, yeah, it's a cool magazine. I like writing for it.
Do you get to go to specials, press screenings and things of horror movies because of it?
Yes. Yeah, I do. I don't go to as many these days because I'm not that far from London, but I don't live in London. So to get in and out of London, but I often get the invites. But yes, I've been to various ones of those, and they're great because you get free stuff. So I don't know, like an example would be, a while ago, I went to see the press screening of a film called The Dyatlov Pass Incident, which is about some Russians that went missing in mysterious circumstances up on a kind of glacier. But when you arrive, like, the film studio are dishing out vodka, and they're dishing out pizza, and they're dishing out kind of lots of kind of free stuff and freebies from the film. So they're a lot of fun, those things. But yeah, I don't go to as many as I'd like. If I lived in London, I'd go to them all the time because I often get the invites. I tend to get stuff sent to me and I watch it at home. Boring.
It's cool though.
Yeah.
Is that part of what inspired you to create your podcast as well?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the podcast is a really fascinating thing that I'm doing at the moment, which I've just started. Hang on. I'm just going to lead into you. Don't mind me. Right. Yeah, it's this. I've just started this, which is called Creepy Cove Community Church. And what this is, it's a podcast which is broadcast from the mysterious fishing town of Creepy Cove, where all horror movies have actually happened. And the idea of it is basically each episode is a church service. And so there's the little church on the peak of the cliff, and they release a church service, and people can tune in and listen to the church service. But this service not only has a sermon and time for meditation and prayer and hymns and music and a kind of scary songs, but funky songs, but it also has characters from the town. So, horror movie characters or characters from films turn up and talk. It's kind of like an audio drama mixed with a kind of spirituality. And I've been amazed at how many great responses I've had for this. It's only been out for a few weeks, but I'm getting things from all over the world of people just saying, like, people saying, for example, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any of that sort of stuff, but I'm really enjoying having a space just to slow down a little bit and kind of reflect on my life. Or people just saying, it's quite funny. It's made me laugh, or I've liked the music. So yeah, it's a Creepy Cove Community Church. And if anyone out there wants to come, we have a place for you up there. So you'd be more than welcome to attend via the medium of podcast.
As a horror aficionado, do you like to collect kind of props and memorabilia as well from there?
Yeah, I do. I've got some. Give me a sec, right? I'll see what I've got. I haven't got loads, but I've got some weird objects. Just a sec. Right. Here's just a few kind of examples of things that I have in my room. Like, for example, a classic kind of Vlad the Impaler mug, which I got at the base of Bran Castle in Transylvania. But no, I was going to show you this. This is a tongue depressor crucifix, which is from, I don't know if you've ever seen Stephen King's Salem's Lot, or you might have read it. Amazing vampire book. But in that, David Soul has a tongue depressor crucifix. And this is not the actual one that was used in the film, but I love this sort of thing, this kind of gimmicky thing that I have. And I'm going to show you this, because this isn't a prop, but it's weird. At the beginning of the year, I got a box delivered to my house, and I didn't know who the heck this box was from, but I opened it up, and inside was this. Let me see. And I'm like, what the heck's this? And you shake it a little bit. It's got something inside it. And anyway, inside the box, as well as this old sort of jar, was a note, a typed letter. And it said that it was from a family who were living in a farmhouse, and that they had discovered this, which they described as a witch bottle. And they said they thought it had some teeth in it. And that basically, since they discovered this bottle, weird things were happening in their house. Their cat disappeared. They started seeing weird kind of spirits around in their house and whatnot. And they were freaked out about it. And they'd heard of me. They'd see me on something, read about me. And so they decided, they found my address somehow. And then they sent this to me. And they said, well, perhaps you should look after it, because it's too scary for us. And so this arrived in this box. And my wife was like, you know some weird people. Why have you got this? And weirdly enough, on the day this arrived, I dropped a knife. This is just before it arrived, actually. I dropped a knife in the kitchen, and when it hit the ground, it span like that. I'm convinced, by the way, it was just a fluke of physics. But that happened, and I filmed it. I put it on Twitter, actually. I filmed it, and then this arrived, this kind of spooky bottle. So for a while, I was baffled as to what this was, and I contacted my publisher. I thought maybe this was some gimmick, because my book Possessed was about to come out. And for quite a while, I honestly got a bit worried, thinking, who the heck's this person with my address? And then finally, I got to the bottom of it. And it turned out that it was sent to me from a monster hunter who I know, a cryptozoologist. And he travels the world searching for Bigfoot, the Mongolian deathworm, all these crazy things. And he decided, for a laugh, he would send this to me. So I still got this. That was a long story, sorry, but it was scary. It was a bit spooky when it arrived, and for a few weeks after. So yeah, I love collecting this sort of stuff. I haven't got really any proper original props. They're too expensive. I just quite like having the gimmicky stuff.
I have a friend who makes horror props. He's
Oh, really?
Yeah, he'd love your books.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so pass my name on.
Will do. Samantha says, have you visited places that have been settings in your books?
Yes, I have. I mean, not least because a lot of the books are based on real places. But sometimes I'll just make stuff up. But there are there are like scenes that take place in real actual places. And so the Book Trail, I think they call them, you might be familiar with them, I don't know, but they're a website who will, come up with a kind of map and a plan of if you want to visit the places from a book, and they've done at least one of my books. So yeah, they're real places, and I haven't written about a place I've not been to and then visited it subsequently, but I tend to write about places I've been.
Someone else's Facebook user, again, it says, asks when you started writing novels.
I started writing novels about 10 years ago, and it was when I was walking with my wife in a field, because I'm so romantic, see, and we were walking along, and I think I saw a cow or something. I can't remember what it was, but I saw something interesting, and it made me start thinking about a story. And I thought, I'm going to write that down. I've never done that. This is about, I think it was 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And I went home and I just started writing it. And then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it became a book. And I'm like, crikey, I've written a book, but will it go anywhere? I don't know. So I started sending that out to agents, not publishers, but I wanted to kind of get an agent. And I got rejection after rejection after rejection. But then amazingly, an agent took me on. And she sent the book out, and no publisher wanted it. So I thought, well, I'm going to write another one. So I wrote another one, sent that out. Nobody wanted that. So I says, right, I'm going to write another one. So I wrote another one. And then I actually changed agent, actually. And then my agent, who's Joanna Swainson from Hardman and Swainson, called me and said, we've got a 2-book deal. And since then, yeah, I've had five books out since 2017, which is amazing, really amazing.
Who would you envisage playing Matt in like a TV adaptation, or would you do it?
Me, I'm a terrible actor, so I would overact. Like, oh my goodness, there's a body on the floor. Yeah, that'd be crap. But yeah, my brother suggested Joe Pasquale, but I don't think that would work. No, I don't really know, because I don't fully know what he looks like. Like I have a bit of a description in my book, but I don't fully describe him. I quite like not describing people too much so that the reader has an idea. But yeah, I'd be happy with someone kind of cool, but not too cool. You don't want them to be too cool. I'm trying to think of an actor's name. Oh, you know who I quite like Jeff Goldblum, right? But I think he'd probably be too quirky for Matt Hunter. But I do enjoy him.
He is good. Maybe a bit old as well now.
Yeah, he's too old for Matt Hunter. Matt's mid-30s, so yeah, it'd be way too old.
Sam's asked you one of her favourite questions that she asks at author chats. She said, "What's your most memorable moment as an author, or what are your favourite moments so far?"
I think one of my most memorable moments is the launch of my first book, which happened in Waterstones, and it was packed, and it was just absolutely. It was one of the best nights ever. And the reason why it was so amazing was because I had so many rejections moving up to that. I'd gone through book after book and not got published. And I was surprised at how down I got about it, because I think up until that point, most things I'd done had kind of worked out. So I was under this completely false impression that I had a thick skin and that, I cope pretty well with failure. Until I actually realized that maybe I haven't failed in a very meaningful way yet, but I did with this. So because I wasn't published and kept getting rejection after rejection, it really kind of got me down. I remember once I was sat in my kitchen, I just was like crying, which, happy to admit that, and just thinking, I just feel so sad that I'm really trying hard to get a book published and it's not working. And maybe it's never going to work. and I just felt very sad about it. And so when it actually happened, and I'm standing there in Waterstones, and there's all these people kind of, I mean, it's like surreal. They've all got champagne and stuff, and they're like, "Hey, hooray for Peter!" And people are lining up to buy your book, and I'm just, holy smokes, this is beautiful. So yeah, it was the rejection that made that the sweeter. Like without the rejection, if I just walked straight in and got a book deal at the beginning, even though that would have been saved me a lot of heartache, I don't think I would have appreciated it quite as much.
There's another question here that says, would you write about Matt's early days? I know you mentioned them in Purged a little bit.
Oh, I never thought about that. I suppose his early days could potentially be quite boring because he's just growing up in church. He's got a bit of a difficult relationship with his dad. So I suppose that's something to explore. But he's not getting involved in murder or anything like that. So not necessarily, but I'm always open to new ideas, and that could be an interesting thing to explore, something that happened in Matt's past, perhaps, that he has to revisit. So who knows, maybe.
What gives you the inspiration for like the supernatural aspects of each of the books? So you've had like demonic possession, you've had the with the Trinity, you've had
I mean the most supernatural book of mine is the second one, called Unleashed. And speaking personally, like this is probably my favorite, in the sense that it's my most personal book. It's a very meaningful book to me. But ironically, I think like some people have read, this is the second one. Some people have read this and said it's better than the first book, or that it's the best book I've written. But a few people have said, I didn't get this one. This because this one does explore the supernatural in a bit more depth. But it's still a crime story and everything. But the story behind this is a group of young teenage girls. They witness a strange figure, an animal stroke kind of human figure that's standing on the top of a house. And there's a lot more that happens. But this thing, I wrote about that because I experienced that myself when I was a teenager. And so the idea for that book came from real life. Me and my friends, I think maybe I was on a kind of quest for discovering evidence of life after death or something, because I'm a bit scared of death. So I wanted some evidence. I'm not the sort of person who just believes just because like a vicar tells me. I want to see stuff. I want to have a convincing kind of intellectual argument about the potential existence of these things. So we went on all these ghost hunts, and one night we saw something really strange up on. It was almost like a tall black rabbit, but like a person, hybrid. And anyway, we saw that, ran away, and then I went back and it had gone. And because I'm open-minded, I thought it could have been a trick of the light easily. And then when I was older, I became a Christian. And about a year after I'd become a Christian, I went to a church, and the minister said to me, when I first met you, when you first came to this church, I saw this black, tall kind of rabbit thing standing next to you. And it was like, oh, creepy. But he prayed and stuff and all that. It never affected me. I didn't see anything. But the point was, it was a really weird experience. And it inspired me to write this book, which explores the clashing worldviews, where one person thinks something is supernatural and the other person says no. There's people die in this book, and the supernatural religious people are saying, oh, there's some sort of ghost on the loose. And Matt Hunter's similar to Possessed. He's like, no, there's a real flesh and blood killer here. We have to stop them. And Matt is very rational, and I respect that, because I respect atheism. Like I meet some Christians who seem to think atheists are like foolish or something, or narrow-minded, and I don't know why they would think that, because I think atheism is a completely reasonable way of looking at the world. But it's just not a worldview that I could live with, I suppose. I'm intrigued by the evidence to the contrary. So yeah, crack. Yeah, I'm really waffling. I'm so chilled out, comfortable here. I'm on a waffle. Please continue.
Fine, waffling is great. Lucy says, what kind of music do you listen to? Does it go with your love of horror?
Yeah. No, I listen to hang on, let me grab an album. This is the album I was listening to before. No, I listen to soundtracks a lot, and film scores. I find they really help me kind of get in the zone. But to be honest, I listen to film scores all the time anyway. I listen to them when I sleep. And by soundtracks, I don't mean like I'm listening to kind of Dirty Dancing or, Reservoir Dogs with songs and stuff, as cool as they are. I mean, like actual instrumental music from films and some very obscure ones. I've got a really kind of extensive collection of soundtracks, some of which are quite expensive. Became expensive because I love that stuff. So I listen to that because it kind of makes life feel epic. I love the idea of like driving to the school and I'm listening to kind of Bernard Herrmann's Psycho and dropping my kids off. And it's just that really atmospheric. So I love music, but I used to be in bands quite a lot. I toured after university. I toured with a band as a singer and toured around Britain and in Ireland and Germany. And that's what's quite nice about this Creepy Cove thing, because there's a lot of music in this, and like every episode there's an original song or a kind of spooky version of a hymn. And so I've been getting all of my instruments. I play guitar and drums, play keyboards and sing. So not particularly brilliantly, but I do all those things, and I've been able to get back into that again with this crazy podcast. So yeah, music's very important to me.
What was the name of the band that you toured with?
You wouldn't have heard of them. They were called TVB, and they were like they were in this sort of Christian world, and so yeah, we would sing some of our own songs, but most of it would be kind of covers, and it was a really fun year. But before that, I was in a band at university called Clouded Vision, and there was talk at some point of potentially getting a record deal, but that didn't really come to fruition. And I also got a bit tired with that. I wanted to do something else. I used to play piano in a pizza restaurant for a while as a student, and I just wrote loads of soundtrack music because I thought I could be a composer. I just like to do something creative, and so for my 20s and teenage years, I was doing band stuff, and then when I stopped doing that, that's when I started thinking about writing books. Anything creative will do.
There's another question here that says, have you got any standalone novels in the pipeline?
Well, yeah, not in the kind of official pipeline, as in like a commissioned publishing deal or anything. But there are a few things that I've got kind of bubbling over, which I'm exploring. But at the moment, for the foreseeable future, I'm going to kind of be plowing a fair amount of stuff into this podcast stuff, because I'm going to be expanding that over the coming months. And that actually, ironically, will start to involve some written work. So, for example, like this Creepy Cove is a town in which really crazy and bizarre things happen. But because I'm creating a world, there's no reason why I won't put a book out about the local history of this place, or those sorts of things. So yes, I'll see where that goes anyway.
So we're coming to the end of our time, but I've got a couple of more questions for you.
Yeah, sure.
Someone asked if you have music when you write. Do you have like a playlist that you listen to when you write?
Yeah, I do. And so I will, for a particular book, I'll put together a set playlist, which I will listen to sometimes over and over and over again. It can't be anything too kind of distracting, but I listen to stuff quite a lot, particularly like Ennio Morricone, who died recently, the composer, who's most famous for things like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and Mission and stuff. But he's done a lot of like spooky, crazy music, and I listen to some of his stuff. And so yeah, I have that going. But I also listen to soundscapes and sound effects. So, for example, in Unleashed, for example, there's a scene where they meet in the park, and there's a kind of spooky conversation that happens in the park, quite a long conversation. So for that, as well as having music, I just pulled in audio sounds like the sound of a tree creaking, the sound of kids playing in the distance, the sound of a breeze, and just had the whole thing playing in my ears. And I'm just like in the zone. And then I write that way. So yeah, it's very important to me.
Do you ever thought about sharing those playlists for people to sort of listen to as they read?
I hadn't thought about that, although I did. I did actually. I did write full soundtrack albums for the first 2 books. So for Purged and Unleashed, so they have full albums that are available through Bandcamp. And amazing, I couldn't believe it, but the soundtrack to Purged got nominated for a film score award on some website somewhere. I don't know where it was. And I'm like, wow, like, so people were actually listening to it. People were buying it, it was available. So yes, for those first 2 books, I sat down and went, right, I'm going to write a theme for Matt Hunter. I'm going to write a theme for, the murder that happens at the beginning and a full score and release that. And people seem to like it. Crazy.
Would you write more nonfiction?
I would like to. I've written articles since then, which I enjoy doing. But I would love to write another nonfiction, not least because the research experience is just so rewarding, and so I would like to. However, speaking frankly, nonfiction doesn't pay a lot now. Neither does fiction. Fiction, to be honest, I still have to do other things alongside what I fiction as well. But at the moment, at least my level, the nonfiction stuff doesn't pay a great deal, and so it's not that I'm like just out for the money, but I have to be wise because writing a nonfiction book takes a lot of time, and so I have to go, well, can I afford to take 6 months or 8 months out of my calendar to focus on just something that wouldn't particularly get a lot of income? So yeah, I don't know. My nonfiction publisher just asked me, if I was up for doing something else, because they really loved the book and it had such a good response. The Frighteners, I think it comes out in Taiwanese this year or something. So I love that. I'd love to do something again, but I'm not sure what.
It's a really good book, The Frighteners.
Yeah, thank you. It's supposed to be funny. The idea of the book was to be funny, but actually just grabbing it and the point of this book. I'll read you the opening. No, I'm not going to read a chapter or something. I'm just going to read the dedication, which is very short. And I dedicated this to my children, my 2 children, and the dedication's short, and it just says, for Emma and Adam, this book about scary things sometimes being fun ended up as a celebration of self-acceptance. But it takes thousands of words to get there, and there's some pretty freaky bits along the way. So for now, you can just read the shorter 9-word version of the book, and here it is. Be who you want to be, okay? Be you. And that's what this book's about. In fact, that's what I'm about completely. In Creepy Cove, everything I do is encouraging people to be themselves. And myself happens to be a quirky mix of interest in the supernatural, spooky, horror, fun, toilet humor, music. That's just me. And you're you and everyone out there as themselves. And I get sad when kind of society tries to force people into one slot or another. I think my kind of life's message is to say, you are whoever you are in all your quirks. You're wonderful and fantastic as you are. And the best thing to do is just to be yourself. I've tried to do that with my stuff.
That's great. Do you want to just finish us off with a reminder of all your books?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, well, I should have a bit of music in the background, like a sort of da 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 da. That's the first one. Purged. That's the first one in the series. Purged, which is about, very quickly, it's just about a Christian serial killer who thinks the kindest thing to do is to get people and baptize them, get them to be Christians, set for heaven, and then murder them immediately afterwards, because that way they'll fast track to heaven and they won't lose their faith. So that's that one. Obviously, that's psychotic. I'm not advising that. The second one is Unleashed, which is this kind of weird, freaky black rabbit murder case. So that happens, which explores the notion of poltergeists and the spirituality of Ouija boards and all that sort of stuff. The third one is Severed, which is the book about the strange pseudo-Christian cult. And this explores the topic of the Trinity in a twisted way. But it's just a crime fiction novel, really. And then the last one, the latest one, Possessed, which explores the explosion in growth of people asking for demonic. It's not asking for demonic possession, but asking to be exorcised from it. And finally, yes, The Frighteners, which is trying to explain to the world why human beings have a morbid streak and why that is actually quite a natural, healthy thing.
Thanks so much for coming and doing the interview with us. It's been fantastic.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's been fun. You're a great interviewer. You're good at, and all these guys have got some cool questions. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
Okay. See ya, everyone. Bye.